Welcome to Safety Spectrum, your environmental health and safety connection. This program is a presentation of the Michigan Safety Conference. For almost a century, the annual conference has provided credible educational opportunities and valuable support to the safety and health practitioner by offering 120 instructional programs, along with exhibits highlighting the latest in safety equipment, instrumentation, and demonstrations. To learn more about the conference, please find us at MICH, safetyconference.org. Welcome to Safety Spectrum. I'm your host, Sheila Ide. This program is sponsored by the Michigan Safety Conference, which has been providing AHS education along with exhibits of the latest products and services for more than 90 years in Michigan. Our topic today is getting to the bottom through root cause analysis with our guest, Cindy Pauley. You know, things rarely happen in a vacuum. What might be considered purely accidental or led to a eureka moment may actually be a sequence of events and circumstances that led to one final and ultimate conclusion. Cindy Pauley serves as project manager for Sologic's large client RCA program deployments, where she coordinates training logistics, communications, and finances. Cindy brings extensive safety experience to Sologic, having developed and deployed safety and compliance programs in the agricultural, chemical, engineering, construction, oil and gas, and manufacturing industries. Her prior experience at Agrisphere, Mears Group, Enbridge Energy, and Dow Corning provides Sologic's clients with the expertise needed to efficiently meet their problem-solving needs. Cindy is a certified occupational safety specialist and has both a master's and bachelor's degree from Central Michigan University. Thank you for joining me this morning, Cindy.
Thank you for having me, Sheila.
Well, why don't you start right out at the beginning? What exactly is root cause analysis, or RCA as you call it?
Yeah, well, root cause analysis, RCA, as you say, and we'll use that probably throughout our podcast just as an acronym to make things shorter. It's a method of problem solving that digs deep into an event or an incident so that you can get down to the true root causes or the faults of whatever incident or event might have occurred. From there, you want to find effective solutions that are identified for each of those causes. And eventually you're going to implement those solutions so that they prevent recurrence. So essentially a root cause analysis is trying to get down to the causes, find solutions, prevent recurrence. It's an integral part of any company's continuous improvement program. Essentially, when the event happens and a decision to be made, basically, and you've done your analysis and you've put your solutions out there, there's a better understanding of what the bottom underliers are. And we'll get a little bit more into detail further on.
You see it, you use it after an incident, but it can also be used for pre-planning, couldn't it?
Oh, absolutely. RCAs are performed following an event most often. That's the most common place when people will do an RCA. However, if you perform an RCA prior to an event, it's even more effective because the solutions that come out of the RCA are going to help prevent the event from coming to fruition in the future or in a different facility or at a different time in a similar situation. They can be proactively performed as an annual activity, or especially after a near miss, that's a good opportunity to do an RCA, or during risk assessment activities. So these are all opportunities to gain insight from employees of the hazards they face every day, the regular issues that they tackle, and the things they feel they could use better solutions for that will make their jobs easier. Taking this kind of information and completing an analysis that has our SMART goals. We've all heard of SMART goals: specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time bound. Those are the types of solutions that come out of these. And if you're doing those ahead of time, then you're kind of nipping the opportunity for an incident to happen before it can.
You say SMART goals. Is that an acronym that you use in your company?
Yeah, it's like I said, it's specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time bound. The other thing I kind of want to hit on a little bit, Sheila, before we go further is the proactive process of doing an RCA kind of supports the Heinrich's safety triangle, which a lot of the folks listening are probably out of the safety.
Basic safety stuff.
Yeah, basic safety. So for those that have not heard of the triangle, basically what this is, it's a concept that declares that if any repetitive action or a condition that presents itself more and more often, so the more of these little tiny underliers that occur, the greater your chances are eventually of having a serious incident. So think of it like, I like to think of it like playing the lottery, right? You buy more tickets so you can win, right? That's the basic concept of playing the lottery. More tickets
Never worked for me though, Cindy. Never worked for me.
the more tickets we buy, the better the chances are winning. Only with the safety triangle, we don't want to win that lottery, right? So every time we're doing one of these little minor incidents, that's like buying a ticket. Eventually you're going to win the lottery if you don't quit buying tickets. So that's kind of how I like to think of the safety triangle is don't buy tickets.
Well, it's kind of a proactive thing because, you know, it seems like the old days, it's always about reactive. And with an RCA, sometimes you are doing it from the old days after an accident happened instead of being proactive before something occurs. So I think your explanation of somebody near misses before something actually happens, that's the true beauty of the RCA.
Right. And I believe organizations are getting way better as well, Sheila, now at doing risk assessments ahead of time so that they can develop what their KPIs, their key performance indicators, and their goals are going to be for their company. And part of those come from the risk assessment. And when you're doing a risk assessment, that's a perfect time to do an RCA, right? Because what exactly are your risks? You don't know what your risks are unless you know what might cause something to happen within that, right? So in my opinion, doing those during risk assessments is an opportune time to kill two birds with one stone, really.
I think one of the first ones I ever did, and we're talking ancient history, was how to use a fire extinguisher. I think that's how everybody teaches it. You know, what are the steps to using a fire extinguisher?
Sure.
So 1, 2, 3, and it's amazing the number of steps or issues that you can come up with if you really go at it with a group. Kind of interesting.
Absolutely.
So what do you consider the most effective steps of an RCA? What have you found to be the most useful?
So our Sologic model is basically 5 steps. First thing that we like to do is gather and manage data. Okay. All RCA should be driven by reliable and solid, substantiated evidence. Okay. And by evidence, we're talking procedures, witness statements, could be a one-line diagram if it's an electrical incident. Any kind of data that is tangible and solid, reliable evidence is going to be the first thing that you want to do. Gather all that stuff first. The next thing we want to do is identify what we call the problem statement. Actually, you can see all these on the board right here. How convenient. So for people that can't see, we've had these 5 steps listed on the board behind me. The next thing you want to identify your problem statement. The problem statement is your focal point. This is the actual incident or event that triggered the root cause analysis in the first place. Okay, this is usually going to be the undesirable consequence that we want to prevent in the future. After you've done that, your third step would be to do a cause and analysis or a cause and effect analysis. My apologies. This includes a full examination of the event. And like we mentioned earlier, this is going to be, sometimes it starts with the 5 whys. Even our process starts with a basic 5 whys and we expand on that. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But an effective RCA will take it one step further and often find underlying causes that you might not typically find when you're doing a 5 why analysis. And we just talked about fire. I'm glad you brought up the fire extinguisher, okay? So if you take a fire, for example, it's caused by what? You have to have oxygen, a combustible material, and an ignition source, right? If you take one of those away, you're not gonna have the fire. So each of these causes would have a subsequent cause, right? Because your ignition source wouldn't be there if there weren't an action to cause it to somehow ignite or cause a spark, you know, so there has to be an action somewhere in order to create that ignition source. Somebody has to turn on a gas, somebody, you know, it has to be there. So we get right down to a little bit further steps and digging into a little bit more parallel causes. The first step is going to be to generate solutions. Okay, so we've already found out our problem statement. We know what our problem is. We've gone through our causes to figure out those. We've found some underlying causes. Now, how are we going to fix those causes? So you want to implement some solutions. And finally, you want to generate a final report. As one of my favorite things that OSHA has always taught me is that which is not written was not done. Okay.
Very good.
So always do
that which is not measured is not, you know,
and not measured, right? You don't measure, you don't write it down. Was it really ever done? So make sure you do the final report. So that's really our 5th and final cause or step for doing an effective RCA.
Well, you know, I think that you and I talked before about how RCAs really kind of started in the automotive industry.
They sure did. They sure did.
Design and engineering and things. Because it seems like when we use it in safety, it's more of a lagging indicator. It's a reactive thing.
Exactly. And it did. It started in Toyota Industries. Okay. I myself drive a Tacoma. So I kind of appreciate Toyota for the five. They developed the 5 Why approach in their manufacturing facilities. And that was exactly right from the engineer's perspective. It's morphed though into from solely reactive to getting better at being proactive. And I'm just here to remind people that to start looking at it that way. Can we do anything before something happens? And I know we're all strapped for time. Everybody, we can't buy more time in the bank, and we all have so many responsibilities and roles in our organizations now, and time is of valuable commodity that it's hard to get a hold of. But if we did take the time ahead of time, you'd be amazed of how much time you save on the back end because you've prevented something from happening. So I think we're moving in that direction, and I think this is just a good opportunity to remind people to use tools like RCA to get there.
Kind of leads into my next thought. I know that I worked at a place where they designed a system, a storage system, and the engineer sat in his office with his drafting table and drafted up the idea of how this is going to work. Never talked to the folks on the floor. And by the time it came out there, it didn't work. They ended up climbing on it, tipping things over. So
sure.
How does an RCA fit into the overall safety and health program?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Sheila. And I'm glad you talked about the diversity there too, because that's one thing that you want to make sure of when you're doing an RCA is including diverse people on your team. So not only do you want to do an RCA, like you were just talking about, if you're implementing a new process, a new piece of equipment, include all of the people that are going to be affected by that, because if there was an incident, they would all be affected in that. So you want to make sure you include them. But RCAs play a significant role in both risk management. I kind of talked about that a little bit earlier, but also continuous improvement, which I mentioned earlier. So what I mean by that is in an RCA program, once it's established, workers need to understand the company's goals, objectives, and the criteria that the company expects would trigger an RCA. Okay, so we call those threshold criteria. They can often stem from the risk management process, as I mentioned, but they shouldn't, organizations, any company, no matter what industry you are, whatever your discipline or specialty is, should have a good handle on what their risks are in their organization and what their procedures are. They need to know how to strive to control those risks, whether it be engineering controls, administrative controls, or even protective equipment, which probably sounds familiar to the safety folks out there as well. So those are your triangle again. But in knowing your threshold criteria, understanding what triggers the RCA, and then proactively performing the RCAs to find those root causes that are going to generate effective solutions. This is your cycle of improvement, right? Your continuous cycle of improvement. So this is what results in a stronger, more reliable safety program. But when we were talking too about including more people in the process, you're building a safety culture too. You're starting to get buy-in from the people that are involved in these RCAs, because you're letting them know that their opinion matters and what they experience in their daily lives matters. So it's not just continuous improvement and risk management, but it's your safety culture. You're putting value in the people that are involved.
Kind of makes me think of another issue. What about new equipment? I mean, you talk about the diversity. I know myself, I've been called in after the fact when something's already been put in place. And then I point out, well, you need this and that, which they say that's going to be so expensive to retrofit. So who should be included in these discussions?
I personally think that if you can imagine what could potentially happen in an event and backtrack from there, I think it's really easy to figure out who your team is. Okay, so let's just take a good piece of equipment, a press brake, Cincinnati press brake. The manufacturer should probably be in that, because the person is going to be able to answer potential questions about how the equipment operates, how safety devices operate. You'll want to have maintenance. Maintenance folks are going to be the ones that are going to have to work on the machine. They're often the ones that'll have to do the lockout. You want to have the operators involved, especially your safety personnel, your supervisors, your directors of whatever plant, anybody that would potentially be involved if an incident were to occur are the best people to get involved in an RCA, especially proactive RCAs. Like you're talking about, if you would have been on that meeting in the first place, right, and you were doing an RCA, you would have been able to say, well, here's a potential cause of such and such. How about we do this before you even implement or put that equipment out on the floor?
Okay. Something else I think purchasing should be involved as well,
Sure.
because it seems like when you purchase something, you usually buy the bare bones. They tell you they don't know what guarding have to be on it. That's up to you, that sort of thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely correct. Yes. Anybody that's going to be involved in the process of implementing any piece of machinery, I think should have a say in what the risks of implementing that piece of equipment or even a new process. Let's look at a bigger picture and do a process. You may have many pieces of equipment. So you would want to have your quality people involved and your reliability folks involved in those. So it really depends on the situation. But the more teams kind of should only be about 3 to 8 people. But it depends on the event. So the larger the event or potential event, obviously the larger the team would be. But you want to make sure that your key players are the people that would be involved in identifying causes.
You can still request input, though. I mean, if somebody wasn't on the team, you would get input and do your investigation or
absolutely
research. Yeah,
absolutely, yes.
So how would you avoid a blame game, especially after the fact of something maybe going wrong? How do you keep from blaming the operator or the person who got injured, or
right
kind of getting close to those issues where did I do this wrong type of thing?
Yeah, and I think that's human nature. I think we all grow up naturally wanting to protect ourselves, right? So when something happens, we want to point at like when we were little, we want to point at our siblings and say, oh, she did it, he did it, right? But as we recall, that didn't work then. And suffice it to say, it's not going to work now, especially in the corporate world. So to suggest that an event or an incident is simply because of a human error is a very serious allegation. Okay, it's against a person or people involved, and it's very contrary to the no blame game culture that it's actually paramount, in my opinion, to active participation in finding what true root causes are in some situations, right? People aren't going to, if they know they're going to get punished while they're doing an RCA, they're not going to participate. They're not going to offer any input. They're going to shut down. I think the goal of an RCA is not to punish the people that have made a mistake. The goal of an RCA is to avoid whatever happened from happening again. Okay, so having an open mind to potential systemic issues that cause a person to react in a certain way is way more effective and sustainable to finding workable solutions. Establishing an unbiased, empathetic environment based on facts, and that's the key. That's the key. We talked about data collection and evidence earlier. Mm-hmm. The key to effective and good data and evidence is that it is based on fact and not emotion. Okay, and if you have that concept going in mind, and you're not going to blame anybody, because we all make a decision based on certain things, right? Certain things that already are happening. So those are the systemic issues. I maybe decide to take a shortcut through a work site because the normal path that would be safe for me is muddy or icy, right? So I made the decision to make the shortcut. Sure, I made the human error when I slipped on something else and fell, but there was a systemic cause of lack of maintenance or a process that was not in place to make sure that the normal path was safe for me to travel. So we need to get down to what's causing people to make decisions rather than just pointing a finger. You're not going to get anywhere productive if blame is thrown around. So you really want to put that out the window when it comes to RCAs.
I think what you're suggesting is that if you just accept that someone made a mistake, you're limiting your research, you're limiting the other causal
absolutely
issues.
You're missing,
so you're going to miss the big picture probably.
Exactly, you're missing underlying causes that even if that one person decided differently, if you don't fix the underlying causes, other people could potentially make the same human mistake because the underlying cause is still there. Just so it's like waiting to rear its ugly head.
It's kind of an education issue with the people who are participating in the RCA, but I know you and I talked about the solution isn't always re. I thought that was kind of interesting how you put that.
Yeah, so when you come down to, you figured out your causes, you figured out your parallel causes, you want to make sure that what your solutions are isn't necessarily reing it to death. And what we mean by that here at Sologic is retraining, reevaluating, reviewing, re-auditing. These things are good to do, but are they an effective solution to actually changing what caused the event to occur? Probably not. So we try to eliminate the re's. Okay, so reverse that train of thought and go to the drawing board and figure out what do we have to do to tangibly fix whatever it was that happened.
This may not be a fair question because I didn't ask you this before, but do you think most of the time from your experience that there's a whole set of circumstances before an incident happens? I mean, things are not purely accidental.
In my experience, have always found, and I'm going to throw this out there, Sheila, that 100% of the time there have always been underlying causes. And I kind of want to just throw this. Let's just take the slipping of the ice. You know, I have a little chart here that we have done before, but I just want to go through slipping on the ice with somebody. It's just something simple as that, right? So if we were to sit down and do an RCA, we're going to say that I broke my hip. Okay, so that is your problem statement. An employee fell, broke their hip. So if we said, why did she break her hip? Because she slipped on the ice. Well, why did she slip on the ice? There was ice on the sidewalk. Well, why was there ice on the sidewalk? Well, because the snow had melted and overflowed from the roof. Well, why did that happen? Because the eaves were full of leaves. And why did that happen? Well, because there's no maintenance. You know, the maintenance person didn't clean it out or something like that. Okay. So you get basically, okay, we need to clean our eaves, right? But what if we backtracked and we added what we do at our Sologic? We have two basic questions that take us through this process. And I'll use my ice slipping example to help demonstrate that. So we like to say what caused the effect, right? We just went through that process with the ice. I broke my hip because I slipped on the ice. I slipped on the ice because it had overflowed from the eaves. Why did it do that? Because of, they were too full and hadn't been cleaned out. Simple, right? We think we've kind of gotten to the problem. But with the logic, our process, we add a second question in there to get to those parallel underlying causes you may not think of. So we always say, if every time this happens, does it result in that effect? So for example, if every time I slip on the ice, do I fall and break my hip? If your answer is no, then there must be something else missing, right? So no, every time I fall on the ice. How many times have you fallen on the ice, Sheila, and not broken your hip?
Every time.
Every time, right? So there has to be significant force. So you'd have to fall on the right type of thing or in the right manner, so there's that part in there. So let's take a little bit further. If every time snow melts and drips onto the sidewalk, does that cause to have ice on the sidewalk?
Not every time, no.
Why? Because there has to be a low temperature. It has to land in an area where it's going to collect where people walk, right? So I hope I'm kind of giving you a good idea of how our second question really digs down into things.
There's more than the obvious out there. You got to dig
way more than the obvious. Okay. So let's take that a little bit further. So one of the reasons there's ice on the sidewalk is nobody threw snow melt, right? If every time there's no snow melt or every time somebody forgets to throw snow melt, does that result in this effect? No. So see this, every time we do this, you're basically bringing up the fact that, and this would easily, you would see if we carried this on, this is easily going to, you can see already, this is not because Cindy chose to take a different path, right? It's because there are maintenance issues of cleaning out troughs. There might be an issue with the path that we're taking. That what if there's a path that isn't underneath a gutter system? Would that
even the snow melt, even having the snow melt available at places where it accumulates that'd be a solution, I suppose. But
yeah, see what I mean? So we just eliminated the human error that Cindy's a dummy and just walked in a bad way, right? I just proved that human error is really not the cause.
Not always the whole story.
Yes. So now we've seen the whole story.
There's a certain amount of human error. And I don't like to say that people, do the wrong thing. It's just we tend to go in certain patterns. We do things that are comfortable. So I think as a safety and health person, you have to look at what could possibly happen if I'm not 100% on beam conscious of everything around me, because obviously no one can be 100% present all the time. So we have to be sure that when we fix something, if they fail, they don't fail to an injury. That's how I always thought of it.
Exactly. And if we dig down deep and get to a lot of the causes that can have a solution, like you said, that effectively eliminates the actual cause, then when we humans have either a day where we're sick or we just lost a family member and we're not mentally into it, or we're coming off of a surgery, or we've been going through rehab for 6 weeks and we're weak, we haven't slept because we've been working 4 midnight shifts in a row, whatever the factor is, if we can eliminate the other stuff, we've reduced our chances of having an event anyway.
Now that's a dollar and cents issue. That's a dollar and cents issues right there. If you think of it in that way, then you're going to eliminate the hazard.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So RCA saves money in the long run.
Yeah. And that's always something that safety and health people need to do. They have to be able to show a savings. It's always a human savings, obviously. It's a moral issue, but it's also a dollar and cents issue.
It sure is.
So what would you recommend as the next steps to even starting an RCA program?
So one of my favorite lines, don't judge me, is from my favorite movie on the planet, The Wizard of Oz. Don't judge me. One of the lines from there is from Glenda the Good Witch, and I've always kept this in the back of my mind, and it so fits with RCA perfectly, is that she always said the best place to start is at the beginning. Now, I know it sounds like a no-brainer, but often when it comes to doing an incident investigation or events analysis like this, we, and I say we, especially us safety folks, have a tendency to jump right into it, skip right over the causes, all of the causes, and we want to just solve the problems. That is our natural instinct, right? So what we need to do is to get an RCA on the right footing. We need to first develop that threshold criteria that I talked about. Okay, this identifies when an RCA should be required. We chatted a bit about it, but just as a reminder, it should be based on your company's organizational goals and objectives, individually and globally. So local, site-specific, facility-specific, globally specific, as well as those key performance indicators, which you and I know are OSHA and MyOSHA driven as well. We want these to be established for the companies so we can measure ourselves against compliance or regulatory requirements as well. So this is what our threshold criteria should be designed around. And once those are established, then the RCA process can be finalized, trained to the people that are going to be facilitating the RCA, and then people that might, just a general communication and training for employees so they know how to be a really good team member when it comes to offering up causes and potential solutions and issues that they face every day. They need to know how to complete the RCA without blame, like we just talked about, and having an understanding of preventing human biases. We all have a bias. We want to jump to a conclusion based on my personal experiences, and whether it be life or at work. I might see things differently because I also have a background in disaster relief and emergency services. So I might go into an event thinking completely different than somebody that came from a healthcare industry. So you need to also keep those biases out of the picture. And also don't forget reporting and communicating the findings. But then one of the most important steps that, as you and I know, completely gets forgotten most of the time is to follow up on the action items and the implemented solutions. I'm a fan of always going 6 months later at a maximum. You could do a 1 month, 3 month, but maximum 6 months. Even though you've implemented a solution and it's working, let's go back 6 months later and make sure it's still working. Because not always is it a final fix, so to me, I'm a fan of always going back. So I also want to mention a little bit of management of change. So for folks that aren't familiar with that, you want to make sure management of change is just ensuring that if you make one change in either a piece of equipment, a process, or a procedure, you need to make sure that throughout your organization, that same change is implemented across the board in similar equipment, procedures, or processes. Okay, so when an RCA comes out, let's say I slipped on the ice, but I'm over on XYZ's facility. How many of these same scenarios exist in all of my facilities at all of my sites? So MOC, or management of change, falls right in line with the previous question that you asked about how RCAs affect the overall safety program. Okay, so it is also part of it.
Change is scary. And it's funny, we did an earlier podcast where we talked about the aging workforce. So
Yes.
we're talking about we don't have as many younger people as we used to, maybe not as nimble. So we may have to be looking at the work site as a whole of how it works for older folks or with people with ergonomic issues, and that I think it's going to be even tougher as we go forward, not
Absolutely.
to have some kind of risk assessment in place.
Absolutely.
Considering those things. So what do you think you can say to someone? How do you convince somebody to work safely?
So I know it's a question everybody asks of safety professionals. My personal philosophy, and I know that you've seen signs probably everywhere and stickers in your workplace and, you know, billboards along expressways that say, be safe, your life depends on it. I have always switched that to my personal philosophy is their lives depend on it. Okay. I strongly feel that we as humans have a tendency to make more risks when we only have ourselves to worry about. But if we take a moment to think about all the people that could potentially be affected by an event based on a decision I made, we might take things a little bit more seriously. So I used to work as a 911 dispatcher. I have many, many friends that were paramedics, firefighters, police officers, even nurses and doctors. So my mind automatically goes to who all would be affected by a serious event if I had made that decision. Okay. So anytime something serious happens, and heaven forbid, even a fatality, let's think about the people that are involved. Okay. You have the person that was hurt, you have their spouses, their company, their children, their pets, their parents, their neighbors that they're close to, the paramedic that had to arrive, the firefighters and police officers that had to arrive, the hospital staff, the surgeons, the nurses that take care of them, the physical therapists that have to take care of them afterwards, the coworker that had to see the incident happen, their supervisor. The list goes on, all because I made one decision that maybe I should have thought about or spoke up about so that an RCA could have been done. So I just take that. It's a lot of pressure to do the right thing. But I think that's why my mind always goes to protecting other people. So by doing that, I end up protecting myself in the long run. So my philosophy is their lives depend on it.
That's a very good point. I know there was one company I work with that on their name badges, they had them put a picture of what was important to them in their life. So it might have been their kids, it might have been their dog, it might have been their motorcycle, but to remind them just exactly the philosophy that you're saying right there.
Right.
Remember,
do you remember
it's
the
not
keynote?
Just you?
Right. Do you remember we had a keynote speaker a few years ago at the safety conference who did the number 4? I loved his philosophy too. He made us all shut our eyes during the keynote speech. And he said, I want you to think of 4 things that are most important to you. Just close your eyes. We took a few minutes. And then he said, okay, open your eyes. And I want to just see if I have people correctly. You probably said your parent, your spouse, your kids, your dogs. Did any of you say yourself? You know, so you should have been one of those 4, and often we don't. But he took it a bit further and he said, now go back to your workplaces and share this story. And then when you're across an excavation trench from somebody who forgot to put their hard hat on and there's a crane above their head, just hold up the number 4. And that'll just remind them that they have 4 things that are important to them too. So I need to change my decisions and behavior. So I always love that. And forgive me for the person that gave that keynote speech. I forgot who it was, but
well, that's a great example, though. The point of it stuck with you, and that's the point of it.
Right.
So do you have any final thoughts? Anything that we haven't covered that you'd like to tell me about?
You know, I would like to say that root cause analysis, when done properly and proactively, we've talked about that, it can be such a benefit to a company's return on investment, which we hit upon a little bit earlier. You know, it does make dollars and cents. That's a MIOSHA saying. It makes dollars and cents to do these root cause analysis. So much more money and time is saved by performing an RCA and avoiding the event in the first place than it does to do the RCA, buy the software, and train your people. Far less expensive, especially when you consider potential fines or legal actions or anything that could potentially go along with incidents. It's not only a deep dive to discover causes that result in sustainable solutions, but I also think it fosters teamwork. We talked about that a little bit. It allows people to share and better understand each other's jobs and the challenges that they face on a daily basis. But they also offer a great chance for a company to advance their employee recognition program. What if you put together an RCA team and you had people that were on the team? They go around, they look for things that they can do an RCA on, and together as a team, they do an RCA, which falls back to the risk analysis that the company needs to do anyway. So it could enhance your employee recognition program, but ultimately it results in a more cohesive, successful workforce. And safety professionals are in a very unique position, Sheila, for doing something that I really hope they take out of this presentation is we are good at it already as safety folks by nature. I think we could take the idea of root cause into other areas of discipline, whether it be quality, engineering, marketing, procurement, all of these different areas, maintenance. All these folks should be aware of RCAs and how it can help them. Even maintenance, let's say they would probably have to perform less maintenance if they did RCAs on why they're having to do so much maintenance, right? If you think about it. So I would hope that safety folks would be able to just go out and spread the word to other departments. But my last thing that I would like to say after sharing all this stuff is how about we just take the R out of worry and start an RCA today?
Oh my goodness. How do I follow that? So, okay, root cause analysis. After an incident, risk assessment, new procedures. It's another tool in our safety toolbox, right?
Yes.
So sure. Thank you so much, Cindy. You can contact her at cindy.pauley@celogic.com. If you'd like more information about the conference or this podcast, please check out our website at mich, safetyconference.org. Thank you for listening to Safety Spectrum. This is Sheila Ide.